And then time passed. And I remember I went to him and I said, so-and-so, I have this illness. It's called cancer, for example. It's making me really sad and upset and angry. What should I do? He looks at me and he says, you really want to know? I said, yeah. He said, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to you. You're going to go exactly through what I went through, but you won't just understand it just yet. But these are the things you'll go through. You're very hopeful. You'll ask for a second opinion, a third opinion, a fourth opinion. You'll have fun. You'll try to tell your story to other people. And you expect them to be in a certain way, but they won't be. They'll sympathize with you, but empathy is very, very, very different. They may give you $10. They may even put their hand on yours. They may even shed a couple of tears. Those are all acts of sympathy, but not empathy. Because empathy means that you really need to be so creative to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And not because you're inspired by feelings or emotions, by personal experience, and by having observed the experience, processed the experience, digested the experience. And that's something that's very, very rare. Human beings don't do that often because it's a difficult thing to do. So you don't get someone like the Dalai Lama come on the stage and say, let me tell you the Four Noble Truths. Suffering is because of attachment. Well, he has no business really saying those things. Because unlike the Buddha, the Dalai Lama was never married, so he wouldn't know what marriage is. The Dalai Lama never had to compromise, go back and forth with his wife, because he was never married, he wouldn't know what that means. Dalai Lama never fell in love with a woman, like the Buddha. He never knew what that meant. The Dalai Lama was taken out of Tibet at the age of 2. So he wouldn't know what it means to love your parents. He wouldn't know what it means to have your parents love you back. The Dalai Lama doesn't know any of that stuff. Dalai Lama never had children, like the Buddha. What the Dalai Lama has is, he lives like Siddhartha. The monks gave him a very safe space where he sat, he read, he thought, he talked to some people who were going through some difficulties in life. He gave them some phrases from these books. No doubt there is a good amount of wisdom in it, but it's just table talk. What I expect from a wise man like the Dalai Lama is when he walks on the stage and he looks at his audience and he realizes that 90% of the people who are listening to him are married with children, are very much immersed in life. To tell them the Four Noble Truths are nearly impossible for almost all of you. If there is anything good about the Eightfold Path, is to make sure that your physical life doesn't fall apart. You want to buy a house? It's a great thing to buy a house. Make sure you have a job. Make sure you have a savings account. Make sure you have a steady income. Not to say that attachment is suffering. Are you kidding me? That's a stupid thing to say. So I sat back and I listened to my friend. I said, Amir, you're going to share your story with people, and then you're going to feel homeless. You want people to do something for you, to look at it in a certain way, to feel for you in a certain way, but none of them are. Eventually, like Socrates, you're going to walk home alone. And that's one of the things you need to understand when you read the dialogues. People knock on his door, Socrates' door, at 4 a.m, saying to him, the sun is out now, come on, let's go have chit-chats with people. You like to see you demolish people in conversations, in dialogues. He says, okay, and it's a good tactic, because it's like judo. What Socrates came to understand is that words have power inside them, they have meaning inside them, but people don't really realize that. They say, I'm in love. Really? Well, who is the I? What sort of I are you? How was this I created? I mean, there's a good amount of power when you open your mouth, because you assume that you know what you're talking about. And most often you don't. People say all these ridiculous things all the time. I love, really? Which I are you talking about? The physical, the emotional, psychological, intellectual, the social, the political, the religious, the spiritual? Which one? So I don't know, just I. Okay, fine. Love, really, which love? Ludos, agape, pragma, stoga, which one? I don't know, I just love. And then when you ask people, these kind of questions, they get puzzled, they get confused. And in their confusion, they become really angry. And that's what his students enjoyed. They weren't really there to become like Socrates. They were there to simply watch people crumble. Now, what is interesting after Socrates and his friends being out while the sun is out for 5-6 hours, there comes a point where Socrates, as a 40, 50, 60-year-old man, gets tired. He says, I want to go home. But on his way back home, he always walks alone. When the sun is setting, Socrates always walks back alone. Why? When you know you're going to die, it's a burden you have to carry yourself. No one is going to carry this for you. And if you go back to the Gospel of Matthew and as well as Gospel of Luke, which is a prophet is never welcome in his own town, Socrates is never going to be accepted by his wife as the great philosopher or by his kids as the great philosopher. Socrates is far too close to his family to be recognized as a philosopher. So he's always going to remain invisible. There's a good amount of grief, and he, I think, takes care of the grief by going outside and having a conversation with people. Now, I believe that my friend didn't really know what he was talking about, but after a while I came to realize it is indeed true that my best companion, I say my best, not because I like my companion, just I can't get rid of it. My most faithful companion is what they call cancer. You can't walk away from it. It's there. Okay? And what happens when you realize that you're on a time clock? What's going to happen to you? Well, you come to realize you don't have much time ahead of you. How's that going to make you feel? How's that going to make you feel about your hopes and dreams? How's that going to make you feel about your wife and your kids? You're going to lose hope. And what happens when you lose hope? You're going to get depressed. What happens when you get depressed? You're going to feel really, really alone. What happens when you feel really, really alone? After a while, you're just unreachable. Sometimes you pray for death even. Sometimes you scream for justice. See, none of these things you can understand because you're not there. And then when I come to a place where I accept the fact that, in fact, I do have cancer and it's not going to go away, you better mature up, grow up, and deal with it like an adult. Then when my kids come to me and say, Dad, are you dying? I say, yeah, but let me tell you a few things about death. Let me tell you a few things about what it means to be young, to have energy, to have hope, to have dreams, meaning, purpose, ambitions. Man does not live by bread alone. Let me unpack all these things for you. Once you accept all these things, the fact that your time is limited or short, then if you're lucky, and I don't know how that happens for people, if you're lucky, before you actually die, you will gain some nuggets of wisdom. And if you've had some intellectual practice, you can put that experience into language and then express that experience to your kids in a way that they can understand. Now, when you ask, what does Socrates do? Well, you need to understand what it takes to become a Socrates. Socrates is a man who lives in a cave, like the salmon fish. What do fish see in the ocean? They see other fish. They see rocks. They see algae. They see sharks. They have friends. They have enemies. Sometimes they feel at home. Sometimes they feel out of place. But it's a world that they know well. It gives them meaning. What happens when all of a sudden a salmon fish feels homeless, that this is not their home? What happens to their friends? Well, they begin to vanish. It begins to not hang out with them as much. Is he going to feel lonely? Absolutely. Is he going to live in conflict? Definitely. Is he going to self-hate? Absolutely. Is he going to be confused? Yeah, because he doesn't know what's happening to him. But because there are otherwise salmon fish around him, he remains protected. So what happens to his confusion? They tell him why he's confused. His self-hatred. They tell him why he hates himself. And all of a sudden, these emotions that have the power to make you profoundly lonely, all of a sudden become a source of inspiration. You write a poem about your loneliness. You write a poem about your anger. You see. And by the time you leave the ocean or the sea, you've already lost so much. You don't care for friends. You lost them a long time ago. You don't care for the ocean. You no longer had any interest. So when you reach the top, the moment you began to realize that the ocean is no good, that the friends in the ocean is no good, that the things in the ocean is no good, you realize that you can no longer live by ocean alone. You wanted something else. Before you become a Socrates, in other words, before you're touched by God and eventually become a philosopher like Socrates, you become dead to assumptions, to opinions, to diversity. You become a black and a white person. You know, I hope we never get to a place in life where you go and sit in AA centers, or you don't go to a therapist office to talk about certain addictions that you have. But what usually happens, and I talk about AA because our car wash was next to an AA center, and once in a while we would go in because they had a Coke machine, and we would put a buck in there and grab a couple of Cokes and those things. And eventually we became friends with some of the people who would frequent there. There was always this man who was guiding a community of 8 to 12 people. And once in a while he would walk to the car wash and just, chit-chat with us. He would always tell us about the people he lost in his life. He would always tell us about the way he abused his body. He would always tell us about the money that he gambled away, And there was a reason why they chose him to rescue or to be a messiah to all these alcoholics or people who had different kinds of addictions. He knew what it meant to live in the world of addiction. He knew what it meant to have loved and lost because of addiction. He knew what difficulties he had to go through to overcome the addiction, the loneliness, getting rid of friends, your parents being disappointed in you and eventually dying before seeing you becoming a healthy man. He had seen all of those things. So when you ask, how does one deal with being an addict, go through the struggles that an addict goes through, how do you overcome the addiction? How do you ultimately find salvation? That's Socrates. You do it all on your own, by yourself. No one can do it for you. I was having a conversation with my wife a couple of days ago, and she says, "Can you help me understand A, B, C, D?" I say, "No, I can't." But why? I can't. I can't make you understand. We can talk casually about this and that, but eventually understanding is a journey that you have to just go on your own. I can't do it. And no amount of explanation will ever be satisfactory for you. There is a scene in the movie The Matrix where they have injected this rod into the back of his neck, and he all of a sudden wakes up and he says, I know Kung Fu. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie or remember that particular scene. And when he says, I know Kung Fu, what he doesn't know is Morpheus standing right above him. And Morpheus looks at him and says, show me. And all of a sudden they're in the combat training program, you know. They're in this room and they're about to fight. And when you first see Keanu Reeves or Thomas Anderson, he looks pretty cocky, you know. He tries to be like a Bruce Lee. He goes like this a couple of times, he goes like this a couple of times, and Morpheus is very casual. And Thomas Anderson thinks or assumes that just because he has the software, just because he's read books, just because he's, thought about things a little bit, just because he has certain feelings, he actually knows how to apply the things that he has read. Morpheus is a wise man. He knows just because you speak well, it doesn't mean you understand anything. He says, okay, let's go at it. And so initially, Anderson is enormously arrogant. And then he gets his behind whooped once. And he says, well, this doesn't make any sense. I know the ins and outs of dialogues of Plato. If you have read Dostoevsky's, this great book, Brother Karamazov, it's about Jesus come back around the 15th century. And you assume that if Jesus was to knock on your door and say, I am your Messiah, I've come to save you, that you would have the ability, the capacity to actually recognize Jesus and do as he says. And Dostoevsky says that's actually not true. You may long to be a philosopher, but should Socrates knock on your door, he's going to push you in ways you've never been pushed before. And then you realize, no, you only like to read books on philosophy, but not to be a philosopher, because these are two different things. So Thomas Anderson gets his behind whipped, and he's kind of in a bit of a shock. Kind of collects himself and, assumes a position, assumes farther this position, and the way he is now, he's going to beat up Morpheus. They go at it again, and again he gets his behind whooped. And eventually, through Morpheus and his guidance, he becomes victorious, that he's able to beat Morpheus. And everybody's on Nebuchadnezzar, the hovercraft, is amazed, shocked, that you have this kid only after 5 minutes is able to beat up Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. And that's the thing, you see, that if you truly want to understand anything worth understanding, you need to be trained. And the training is physical. It's tactile. You can't just sit in a room unchallenged and just assume that you understand. It doesn't work that way. So if you want to know how Socrates did all of this and how he went home alone and he was able to be alone, it's because the moment you begin your journey towards becoming a philosopher, your journey begins in being alone. But it's not a comfortable aloneness. After a while, your skin grows thicker and you become more and more comfortable walking the philosophical, or the spiritual, or the esoteric path all alone, knowing that there is no one who can understand you. There is nothing you can do to make people understand you, and eventually you will learn. How? You will either be like some of those Greek monks who live in caves. They talk to no one. They never go to the city. They never ask for food. And they just have a basket, down from the mountains, and once in a while you have a couple of people putting a bottle of wine or a loaf of bread or cheese in the basket. They pull it up at the end of the night, and they have some food they eat, but they never talk to anyone. They have no reason to. Then you have other people who say, maybe I can express my loneliness in a couple lines of poetry. And there's a good amount of wisdom if you can understand those lines well. But you need to understand what the hell it is you're writing about. Not just because you have these ridiculous infantile feelings and moments of inspiration that give birth to 5 pages of a good essay or I don't know, 5 or 6 lines of poetry. Good for you that you can do that, but it doesn't mean anything. It's kind of like saying, I know Kung Fu. And then when the fight begins, you get your ass kicked. So, and you have to kind of consider a little bit as well, because when Socrates was given this poison to drink, hemlock, upon his death, he didn't say, oh, honey, sorry for not being a great husband. He had ceased to be a husband. Even before he got married, he didn't say, oh, my kids, take care of yourselves, I'm sorry for not being there. I'm not sorry to miss your graduation from high school or college, or not being there when you get married, walk you down the aisle, or not being there as a grandfather. Socrates had, long ago, had lost the ability to feel these things, to be interested in those things. There is this scene again in the movie The Matrix when Thomas Anderson dies. He gets shot by Agent Smith in this station. Trinity in the hovercraft kisses him. And Trinity, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, that's the spirit, the feminine, kisses him. The breath of life goes inside Thomas Anderson, all of a sudden comes back to life, despite having been shot by Agent Smith. And Smith is a German word, means you work with machines or work with metals. You come here not because you want to, you just have to, you need a grade, you're like a robot. Society tells you what you do and you do. You have to go to work, you have to write an essay, you have to fulfill certain requirements to get to Cal, you have to do certain things if you're married, and you got kids. These are all just things you got to do, man. They're forced upon you. If you like them, good for you, But there'll come times where you realize this is completely ridiculous. Now, when he comes back to life and he gets rid of Agent Smith, they fight it out a little bit. He disappears for a few minutes. They're in a phone booth, and Trinity is about to be transported to the hovercraft. And he looks at Thomas Anderson and says, or Neo, and says, I knew I would fall in love with a dead man. All right, like the oracle told me, I'm going to fall in love with a dead man. And what does it mean to be dead? Dead to fame, dead to your relationship, dead to your kids, dead to the class, dead to your parents, dead to desires, to ambitions. It's not that you won't do them. You just won't care as much. You're not as involved. You're not as immersed. These are all quicksands that pull people down. Thomas Anderson is just dead. Nothing can pull him down. So he remains Neo. He remains light, one, transformed. Does that? No.
Okay.
It reminds me of a story, I once wanted to go to Los Angeles, and I was on Highway 99 North. And I, after having driven like 6 hours, and this is before cell phones and GPSs and those things, I stopped to get some gas, and I look at this person and I say, how much more till I get to Santa Monica? He says, what? Santa Monica. Like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, because I don't find any city here. This doesn't feel like Los Angeles. He says, you want to go to LA? I said, yeah. Because LA is 99 south. You're on 99 north, going towards Reading. And I say, man, the trip that was only to take, 6 hours, now takes about 12 hours. And so sometimes when students ask questions, my infantile assumption is that, okay, I've understood the question. I trust that the student knows what he's talking about, so let me just go and answer it. So I ramble on for about 5 hours. And then I look at the student. Did I answer your question? Actually, no. My question really was... So just to, again, remind you how difficult it is to ask, how difficult it is to listen, and then to respond. So forgive me for failing you on all three stages. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was wondering if, any time there was a moment where Socrates did.
Yes. It's what they call the axial age. There are a couple of things you need to kind of understand when you ask, were there ever a time where two Socrates lived in Oakland? The answer is yes. But here's the thing you need to know about when there are two Socrates, sitting at a coffee shop, and one Socrates is talking to 5 people, the other Socrates is talking to 10 people. Because in the making of Socrates, you have similar components. Socrates, who has 5 people, eavesdrops on the Socrates who has 10 people and says, I think he's onto something that I'm not yet there. He looks at his own students and says, you guys go sit on that table. In fact, I'm just going to pull up a chair and just listen to that Socrates. 2 Socrates will never fight. They may have some disagreements, and that's at a very, very mature stage. If you want to understand this well, read, I think, the Gospel of, it may be the Gospel of Mark. So you have John the Baptist, who's in the business of baptizing people with water. So he's out there, he's only wearing this shorts and some ragged outfit. And he talks to people saying, oh, you guys are sinners. Let me help you. Let me do this. Let me do that. And then as there's this line of people trying to be baptized by John, all of a sudden he encounters this man kneeling before him. He looks at him. This is no ordinary person. This is Jesus kneeling before John the Baptist. And you have 2 very spiritual people. John the Baptist is a high school student of spirituality. Jesus Christ just graduated from Yale. There is no need to have a dialogue. John the Baptist simply says, I need baptism from you, Jesus. Why the hell have you come to me? He says, I haven't come to you for any spiritual awakening. I'm here to simply keep alive the ritual. You are the person who baptizes people with water. I'm here for that. My job is to baptize people with fire. Okay? You get them ready, I'll take care of the rest. That's what Jesus says to him. And so there comes a point when John the Baptist looks at his own disciples and says, I must now decrease as he must now increase. The sun is out. I, as the moon, need to disappear. And after a few pages, what you have in the gospel is that John the Baptist gets his head chopped off by Herod. So that's what you get when you get 2 Socrates. Now, it is usually rare to have 2 Socrates in Oakland. Axial age means the following. As in Persia, you have Zoroaster. In India, you have the Buddha, very close in time. Okay? Then you have Mahavira in India as well, close to the time of the Buddha. Then you have Lao Tzu in China. At the same time, you have Confucius. You also have Socrates, all within like 200-300 period. It's what we call axial age. And axial means you have this foundation on this planet that for some strange reason you have all these mavericks, you have all these heroes, all of a sudden appearing almost at the same time, you know. And it's what we call Kali Yoga in Hinduism. It means at the darkest time of human existence, you have all these sages coming at the same time, trying to give these teachings that are transformative. Now, that by itself, it means nothing. If you, for example, are walking and a Socrates runs into you, the fact that you have Socrates, it means nothing. The question is, are you at a stage where you can receive Socrates? Are you at a stage where you can receive and understand Socrates? So yes, have there been times where you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 Socrates? Yeah. The way it used to work long time ago is that, let me do it in a way that fits our current system. Adam Smith is a moral philosopher, is an economist. He had said something very interesting about modern capitalism. See, if you had come to me, say, 500 years ago, and you said, Amir, can you make me a coffee mug? I say, sure, I can make you a coffee mug. You just have to wait for about 6 months because I have to make like 10. You're going to be number 11. So you already knew I was the only coffee mug maker in the village. I knew where to go to find the clay. I had the expertise to give shape to the clay, okay, to bake the clay, and then to paint the clay, and then give it to you. Adam Smith comes forth and says, something really strange has happened to us. No one knows anything from beginning to the end anymore. We have entered an age where everybody is just specialized. Sometimes when people come to my house and they say, so what do you do? It's a literally strange question for me to answer because you don't get very many people who say, I teach philosophy. Say, oh, philosophy, yeah, I read a book like 50 years ago. It was very interesting. I say, yeah, it was so interesting that you only read one book on philosophy 50 years ago. Yeah, you had great interest. And then they go for the next question, which is, so what kind of philosophy do you do? And what they're asking is, what do you specialize in? And that is where we get Adam Smith. You have to go on this quest to figure out who knows what sort of a clay you need to make a mug. Then they give you this clay in a plastic bag. Then you have to go find someone who knows how to make an oven. Okay? Then you have to go on another quest. Who knows how to give shape to this clay and make it into something that looks like a cup? Then after everything's done, you have to go find another person who knows how to paint this the right way. And so he argues that we have reached an age, and this is like a century or so ago, even more, that Adam Smith talked about. Today is very, very different. We're far more fragmented, far more incompetent now. That if you want to do anything, you need to look for 50 people, because no one is good at doing anything from its beginning to its finish. So, oh, we're done. Are we? Well, listen, it has been a good semester. It's, yeah. It's good to see all